tell you this. The guy in college football that is feeling more pressure than anybody going into this weekend is Ryan Day. Hello and welcome in. It's always college football, and we are so grateful to have you here with us, or should I say thankful. We are here in the midst of a Thanksgiving holiday, a week of festivities that includes family and football and fun, and for us, college football game previews. We are very happy to be here on our preview show here, leading you into Rivalry weekend. To me, this is the best week of the year. I love bowl games. I love the first week of the season. I love all the incredible matchups that we have throughout the year. But there is nothing that quite comes close to Rivalry weekend. It's just the best. I remember as a player playing in the Iron Bowl 5 times. I remember specific plays from every single one of those games. And there's just nothing quite like it. It's a legacy builder. It's a legacy cementer. It's something that is of the utmost importance to your fan base. And while we've seen changes and we've seen adjustment to the college football landscape, we acknowledge that it's different. The college football that my kids will grow up with is different than the college football that I grew up with, and potentially the college football that you grew up with. But one thing remains the same. You always hold those rivalry games above all else. And that will not change regardless of realignment. And in some cases, realignment renews rivalries like it will in College Station, Texas this weekend. We'll get to that one. Iron Bowl, good, clean, old-fashioned hate. Michigan, Ohio State, or Ohio State, Michigan, whatever side of the rivalry you're on. You don't even refer to the team by their own name. It's the team up north. So it is what it is. We're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to break it down. We will kick things off. We'll go in chronological order, and we will start on Friday night with the Ramblin' Wreck of Georgia Tech traveling to Athens to take on the Georgia Bulldogs. Georgia Tech at Georgia. Line right now right underneath 20, 19.5, 20. Total somewhere in the mid-50s. This game's Friday night. 7:30 Eastern time on ABC. Georgia Tech with a slight advantage as far as rest. ACC teams, they do play vast majority of the games that are between Power 4 teams on Thursdays are played by ACC teams. They've made that a priority. I think it's been a good window for them, I might add. But it's extra beneficial when you have a bye week, you play on Thursday, and then you play the following Friday. So while it's 8 days, an extra day's rest leading into this one might be beneficial. Georgia Tech has that. They played NC State on Thursday of last week, so maybe they have a little momentum. We shall see. This is going to be a fascinating game, by the way. I called this game last year, and for whatever reason, this game is just a little bit more unique this year because I think the world now knows that Georgia Tech's really dangerous, and I'm not sure last year everybody knew that. This year, though, I think people recognize their team speed and the improvements they've made under this outstanding coaching staff led by Brent Key. Question number 1. Can Georgia's passing game, which has picked things up these last couple of weeks, can their passing game take advantage of a relatively porous secondary? Now, don't look now because it feels like all season long we've talked about Georgia, what's missing, what's wrong, why can't they throw it, why can't they do this, why does Carson Beck throw so many picks, what have you. All that I think is completely fair. But I also think part of Georgia's problem is that they're kind of held to a different standard, according to most teams, and it really hasn't been about a production standpoint. It's really been about a mistake standpoint. Because if you look at their passing attack, they're 9th in the FBS right now. They're averaging around 300 yards a game. Now, would I like them to be a little bit more balanced? Sure. Which leads me to question number 2. Will Georgia need balance in this game? Because I just referenced the fact that they have a top 10 passing attack and they're going against a Georgia Tech defense that has shored things up in the front. They've been much better compared to what they were a year ago against the run. But in the back end, there's still quite a bit that they give up from a statistical standpoint. So will Georgia just lean into Georgia Tech's weakness, or will they try to create balance? They are right now 98th in the FBS in rushing offense and 15th in the SEC. They're averaging just 130 yards a game on the ground. I think Georgia, like when I visualize Georgia, Herschel Walker, Nick Chubb, Sony Michel, Todd Gurley, Noshawn Marino, all the incredible backs they've had in the last 40 years, never in a million years would I anticipate looking at an SEC stat sheet and seeing Georgia at the bottom as far as rushing yards a game. But that's where they're at right now. The good news is they might not need it in a game like this if their passing attack continues to click. Question 3, can Georgia Tech stay on schedule offensively? So far this year, on first and second down, Georgia Tech averages 6.3 yards a play. That's 40th. That's going to be really important because when you look at Georgia Tech and how they've been structured, they're a run-first outfit. They just beat Miami a couple weeks ago and completed 6 passes along the way. They want to pound the football. They want to lean on Haynes King and the rushing attack and the outstanding speed that they have, not just a tailback, but as some of the other guys that are used in extended handoffs. Like Malik Rutherford, yeah, he plays slot, but they're going to hand it to him on jet sweeps, which is no different than basically a toss sweep back in the day. So looking at all of that, Georgia Tech's going to need to avoid third and long situations because when Georgia gets in those third and longs, that's when they kill you. When Georgia gets those fast, athletic, disruptive pass rushers along the line of scrimmage, they'll take Mykel Williams, move him inside. You'll have Wilson on the left. You'll have Walker on the right. And they have dudes that are just coming from everywhere. That becomes really challenging. And I think regardless of how good Georgia Tech has been at times in keeping their quarterback upright, they haven't seen an outfit that's quite this aggressive. Let's go to question 4. Georgia Tech, if they can't stay on schedule, so meaning if first and second down are a dud and they're in obvious passing situations, will they be able to protect Haynes King in those situations? So far, they allow less than 0.5 sacks a game. So every other game, they're giving up a sack, basically. That's the second best in college football. They have been awesome. Now, Georgia's not the best as far as creating disruption and getting after the opposing quarterback. They're about 2.6 sacks per game. That's 30th. But I think in an offense or against an offense like this, they do have some advantages with their size-speed combination. And then question number 5. If Georgia Tech's going to win this football game, they're going to have to win critical situations. And that's kind of goes for every team that's a heavy, near 3 touchdown underdog. They're going to have to win critical moments in the game. They're going to have to be great on third down. Well, third down offense for Georgia Tech, not great. They're 70th in college football. They convert about 40%. They are 57 of 142 this year. They're not great on third down, so they're going to have to punch up on third down. Their third down defense, they're actually excellent in this category. They're 11th. Overall, they allow just under 31%, which is really solid. And against Miami, how'd they win that game? Well, Miami, 3 for 10 on third down. And on fourth down, Miami had 3 turnovers on down in plus territory. And overall in the game, Miami was just 1 of 4 on fourth down. So Georgia Tech's going to have to be much better on third down offensively and about the same as what they did against Miami on third down defensively. And then finally in the red zone. This is where Georgia Tech is not quite where I'd like them to be if you're thinking about possibly pulling the trigger on an upset pick. They're giving up 68% touchdowns in the red zone. 19 touchdowns on 28 red zone drives this year. That is 111th in the FBS. So if Georgia Tech wants to win this one, not only do they have to stop Georgia in the red zone, but they also need to probably force them to kick field goals when they get close to the red zone. So looking at this game, I like Georgia. I would take the points. It feels like a lot of points. I think Haynes King and company, he's a veteran player. They have enough speed. I think they'll be able to manufacture a couple big plays. And I feel like 3 touchdowns is just way too many. I take the points, but I do think the Dogs hold on and get the win. One of the biggest games of the college football season, Michigan Wolverines travel to Columbus, where Ohio State is currently about a 3-touchdown favorite. The total around 43. This game's Saturday, noon Eastern time on Fox. Michigan has won 3 straight against Ohio State. Its longest win streak against the Buckeyes since 1995 through 1997. They also won 3 straight back then. They have not had a 4-game win streak since 91. So it's been a really long time since they've had a win streak like this against the Buckeyes. I'll tell you this, the guy in college football that is feeling more pressure than anybody going into this weekend is Ryan Day. He has been exceptional against everyone. Everyone he's played, he's been exceptional. Since taking over as the head coach in 2019, he is 1-3 against the Wolverines. And then basically he's beaten just about everybody else. 47-1 against all other opponents. The lone loss came this year against Oregon on the road. So against all of the Big Ten opponents. So in case you were curious what I was talking about there, Oregon did beat them a couple years ago, and we know they've lost in the playoffs. But against Big Ten opponents, Ryan Day has dominated. What will it come down to? There's a bunch, but it's still Ohio State, Michigan. It's still going to be a line of scrimmage game, which is why we ask question number 1. Is Michigan's power run game back? Now, there was a point last week against Northwestern where things did not look very good for Michigan as far as running the football. Yes, they had a nice, comfortable lead. They were up at the time by double digits, but they had just 14 rushing yards on 12 carries. They still really couldn't find any movement on the interior of their offensive line. And the challenges and the inconsistencies we've seen from that group have really started from the beginning, first game of the year, all the way through week 11. This group has been really untrustworthy. They've been the main culprit. They're not the only reason, though, why the run game hasn't consistently been able to go. Khalil Mullings, after October 1st, has kind of come back to earth a little bit. You look at what he did in the first 5 games, he was off the charts. Thought he was en route to a possible All-American type of season. Well, since that time, the last 6 or 7 weeks, it's all come crashing back. Donovan Edwards, he hasn't really been as advertised all season long. Yes, coming into the year, we all had high hopes, but we've kind of now acknowledged maybe he's not the lead back after all. Now, for a Michigan team that has been years in the making, that led to last year, where it was all about a very clear and established identity. That was a dominant, physical, unrelenting commitment to the run game that you would not deviate from under any circumstance. And you think back to last year, I mean, this is a team that has erased deficits by running it 42 consecutive times. So we've known all along what Michigan is. The question is, could they be that this year? And because of injuries, because of inexperience, because of a complete lack of a passing game, teams have been able to really sell out against Michigan's rushing attack. And there have been times when there have been holes open, and these relatively inexperienced running backs haven't always been able to find the soft spot. But there in the second half against Northwestern, we started to see the light flicker on just a little bit. Now, is it too little too late? We'll find out. Maybe it carries over, but Northwestern, they're not an atrocious run defense. People will point to, well, it's Northwestern. Come on, man. Against the run, they're not bad. So for the Wolverines to go out and rush for about $190 and over 8 yards a carry and 4 touchdowns in the second half, I feel pretty good about that type of performance. But let's acknowledge it is a massive step up in competition this week when they take on the Buckeyes. Buckeyes are 3rd right now in rushing defense, and they're 3rd in yards per carry given up at 2.7 yards per carry. So massive step up in competition. But the second half last week, if they could bottle that up and recreate that performance, it had me feeling a lot better about their ability to potentially make this thing interesting. Question number 2, can Michigan's passing game give them anything? Now, in order for Michigan to win this game, Davis Warren's going to have the game of his life. Okay, that's not that uncommon, by the way. To pull off tremendous upsets, oftentimes the quarterback's going to have to play out of his mind. The quarterback is the ultimate eraser position. But Davis Warren also can't do it by himself. And we know the go-to guy is Colston Loveland at tight end. but he got banged up last week, didn't return to the field. At halftime, we're not sure. He had 3 catches for 22 yards and a touchdown there. I'm assuming all is good to go. I'm guessing he's good to go. But in the event in which he's a late scratch, that will only make things more difficult for the Michigan Wolverines. Even if Loughlin does go and is at 100%, it's a really difficult matchup. Because when you look at what Ohio State has in the secondary, they have Lathan Ransom, who's been outstanding at safety all season long, and they have Caleb Downs, who pound for pound is as good as anybody in college football, regardless of position. Ironically, I think a big reason why Ohio State pursued Caleb Downs so aggressively in the portal is because of this game and because of this matchup. They wanted a physical safety that can cover. Caleb Downs not only checks those 2 boxes, but he checks about 15 other boxes as well. But I think a big reason why Ohio State made him such a huge priority in recruiting last year is for this game specifically and the matchup that he might have against Colston Loveland. We know that the most productive tight end in America is Tyler Warren. And against Ohio State, that's Penn State's tight end, by the way, in case you guys haven't been watching the Nittany Lions. Against Ohio State, he had 4 catches for 47 yards, but they got a little creative in using him as a wildcat quarterback. He ended up having 47 yards on the ground, including a 33-yard carry. That was his biggest play of the game. We also know that the wide receivers for Michigan in Tyler Morris and Samaj Morgan, assuming he can come back, missed last week, they're going to have to create big plays downfield. And so far this year, Michigan has attempted just 6 passes that have traveled 30-plus yards. That's the fewest in the FBS. So I don't love their matchup on the perimeter against this Ohio State defense. A couple things, though, that would concern me if I were Ohio State. I think Davison Igbinosun's a really energetic player. I think he plays with a lot of passion, but I do think his technique from time to time leaves a little something to be desired. The guy is a walking penalty. How many penalties against Indiana last week? I think it was 3 or 4. So he does a really good job of being physical, but if the passing attack isn't going, maybe the best way that they can move it through the air is by way of defensive penalty. Davison Igbinosun needs to be smart in this game. And then Denzel Burke, yes, he's given up some shot plays this year. He's given up 5 20-plus yard completions in the last 5 games, including 2 against Oregon. So will they challenge him? Maybe, but I don't know if Michigan has the guy to be able to really threaten Denzel Burke over the top. So I think he'll probably play a little safe and keep it in front of him. I also think one more thing as far as the passing game for Michigan, they're going to pull out every trick in the book. Why wouldn't they? Okay, running back passes, double passes, screen and goes, pumps, and then most notably flea flickers. And we have seen big plays on misdirection, trick plays affect Ohio State in the past. They cannot fall victim to those in this matchup because that might be the only way Michigan can sustain any type of offensive attack. Question 3, Ohio State's offensive line at times this year has been vulnerable. Will it be against one of the best defensive lines in the country? Ohio State's problems this year have mostly been on the left side of the offensive line. We know that Josh Simmons got banged up, missed time after the 6th game of the year, but now they have lost Seth McLaughlin right there at center. And the interior against this group in Michigan might be the area that would concern me a little bit more. Now, they couldn't really manufacture a lot of push in the run game last week against Indiana. Was that because of a new look offensive line, their 5th different offensive line combination? Or was that just because Indiana's pretty stout on the interior? I don't really know the answer to that. All I know is that they're going to need to run the ball a little better against Michigan than they did against Indiana. I also know that Michigan's defensive line might be the best group that they have to be able to neutralize this game. They have the best tandem at defensive tackle in the country. Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant, they can create tons of problems up the middle of the offensive line. And if you pay too much attention to the interior, guess who's going to get some one-on-ones on the outside? And I think this group on the edges has been painfully underrated by the way of the national media. Josiah Stewart and Derek Moore are awesome. Josiah Stewart's got 8.5 sacks. He leads the team. Question number 4, can Michigan cover Ohio State's wide receivers and limit the passing game. Now, Will Howard will start there because for much of the season, there was this notion that Will Howard is just some system quarterback and that is limited and he just doesn't need to screw it up and needs to just be a distributor. I think he has kind of bucked that trend because if you look at how Will Howard really played this year, he's been outstanding. He's been all you could possibly want and some when you brought him up to become your starter from Kansas State. Now, if there's one area where I'd like for him to be a little bit better is maybe on the downfield throws, but he's been super efficient this year. Really efficient. And on Saturday against Indiana, in one of the biggest spots of the year, 22 of 26, 201, couple touchdowns, rushing touchdown. He had a drop that led to an interception. I really like how Will Howard's playing, and I just don't think he's getting enough credit. We know how good these wide receivers are. They're amazing. I don't need to walk you through the pecking order. Jeremiah Smith's amazing. Emeka Egbuka is unstoppable. I think Carnell Tate's probably the unsung hero of the bunch because he doesn't get the love that he probably deserves. But when teams double cover J.J. Smith, guess who's been stepping up time and time again? That's been Carnell Tate, who I think is a guy that is very important to this team down the stretch in the event in which they continue to double. Having a guy that can win your one-on-ones is massive. When you look at Michigan's defensive backs, Will Johnson, he's missed 4 games in a row. I don't know if he can go. We'll see if he can. But if he can't go, they're pretty gettable on the outside. Whether it's Zeke Berry, Emil Hall, Jair Hill, all have had some difficult moments at times this year in coverage. And one other thing of note, Jair Hill didn't really play until the fourth quarter last week, and he was wearing a different number. They said that they were dealing with something internally. So I don't know what that means, but I do know this. Whoever's out there in coverage better be at their best for Michigan because this Buckeye team and this passing attack doesn't take a backseat to very many teams. Trend in the game, Buckeyes are currently favored right now by about 21 points. That's tied for the second largest spread in the history of this rivalry. So just something to be mindful of when you look at where Ohio State and Michigan currently are. I think Ohio State's going to roll here. I lay the points, and outside of a couple turnovers and maybe a trick play or two, I just don't see how Michigan is going to be able to consistently move the football. I don't think it's a good matchup for them at all. I think Ohio State has had this one circled for 365 days. I think they roll against the Wolverines on Saturday morning. The Iron Bowl. Auburn traveling to Tuscaloosa. Alabama, about an 11.5 point favorite. The total in the low 50s, around 52. This game's Saturday, 3:30 Eastern time on ABC. The Crimson Tide have won 4 straight against the Auburn Tigers. That's their longest win streak against Auburn since winning 9 in a row from 1973 to 1981. I'll be on the call alongside Sean McDonough and Molly McGrath for the Iron Bowl. I can't wait to be there. I can't wait to call this game. This game means so much to me, and I'm very, very grateful and honored to have the opportunity to call it alongside the rest of my crew. Just an amazing, amazing group, and I'm excited to have this opportunity with them. Question number 1, can Auburn run the football? That's the big question. That's been the question for the Auburn Tigers. Now, it should come as no surprise that Auburn is a team that wants to lean very heavily on establishing the ground and pound. It also should not come as a huge surprise that their win-loss record is almost 100% determined by how efficiently they run the football. Their 5 best rushing performances this season all resulted in victories. Kentucky, 326, New Mexico, 268, Louisiana Monroe, 203, Alabama A&M, 177, and Texas A&M, 168. Those are their 5 best rushing performances. All 5 were Auburn wins. Their 6 worst rushing performances all resulted in losses. Their best rushing performance in a loss was against Arkansas, where they ran for $146, but they turned it over 5 times in that game. So it's pretty simple. There's a magic number. There's a Mendoza line for the Auburn Tigers. If they run for more than 147 yards, they win. Pretty simple. They need to feed Jarquez Hunter. He's their outstanding running back. And this is an offense. We know what this offense is all about. They rely a lot on RPOs. They want to allow Peyton Thorne, their quarterback, to read the defense. They want to allow him to read the defensive line. I also think he's pretty good with the ball in his hands himself. He's not going to scare you to death by running the football, but Peyton Thorne, I think, is a very effective runner when he does decide to pull it. So sometimes the RPOs, they can kind of cloud the decision-making for Peyton Thorne, which is why I think Auburn is going to commit more to call it and run it runs. Few less RPOs and just force feed Jarquez Hunter when the opportunity presents itself. Because if he finishes this game against Alabama with less than 25 carries, I think it's going to be very, very difficult for them to win the game. Going against an Alabama defense this weekend that altogether hasn't really been that bad against the run. They've had some moments where it's been pretty good. They give up about $143, but against Tennessee and Oklahoma, those have been their two games where you look at them and they gave up more yards against those two teams on the ground than anybody. 214 yards against Tennessee, 257 yards against Oklahoma. They're going to have to be better against the run because this is a group that will be committed to it if they eliminate some of the RPO decision-making for Peyton Thorne. Question number 2, will Auburn's run game set up some big plays on the outside? Now, Cam Coleman and Keandre Lambert-Smith have each had 100-plus receiving yards in Auburn's last 2 games. They're the first Auburn duo to have 100 receiving yards in consecutive games in school history. So these guys have been playing at a really high level all year long. Well, I take that back. Keandre Lambert-Smith has been playing at a really high level. Cam Coleman has started to come on here as the season's gone on. There were some inconsistencies with his performance early in the year. He was a true freshman and being asked to do an awful lot, but now you can tell he's more comfortable and has developed that rapport with Peyton Thorne, and his confidence level is sky high based on how he's played the last 2 weeks. One of the most interesting matchups in the game might be the cornerback tandem that Alabama has in Damani Jackson and Xavier Brown working against Cam Coleman and Keandre Lambert-Smith. So we'll be watching that very, very closely. Question number 3, will Auburn protect the football? That's been a huge question mark all season long. And if you look at Auburn, I think if you ask anybody that have watched them this year, they are much better than their 5-6 record would indicate. Why are they 5-6? Because they've been painfully bad when it comes to taking care of the football. They are 127th in the FBS in turnover margin. They have turned it over 20 times. In their defense, they've been much better in the second half of the season. And of those 20 turnovers, 10 came in just 2 games. Against Arkansas, they had 5, and against Cal, they had 5. So they're going to have to be really smart with the football because this is an Alabama defense that is outstanding when it comes to making life difficult on the opponents by getting hands on the football. Alabama's number 2 right now in the FBS in takeaways. Notre Dame's number 1 with 26. Alabama's forced 25. So it's a really good group on that side of the ball in turning over the opposition. Question 4, can Alabama take some of the pressure off of Jalen Milroe? Like Auburn, Alabama's success comes when they really commit to running the football. Their 3 worst rushing performances this year were against Vandy, Tennessee, and Oklahoma. All 3 of those games, they lost. They did not eclipse 84 rushing yards in any of those 3 games. Against Vandy and against Tennessee and Oklahoma, way too much responsibility was put on the shoulders of Jalen Milroe. And Jalen Milroe is an amazing player. He's really, really talented, very, very gifted, but he is not the type of guy that can shoulder as much of the burden as they've put on him at times in their defeats. Against Vanderbilt, 31 of their 45 offensive snaps were on Jalen Milroe, whether it's throwing it or running it. Against Tennessee, 59 of their 79 offensive snaps were on Jalen's shoulders. And then against Oklahoma, 41 of 57 offensive snaps were Milroe passes or runs. Another thing too, Jalen also has to accept some responsibility here as well. He has to be willing to distribute because there have been times when there's big moments in the game, when there's big games and big plays to be made, he tries to play hero ball. And when things aren't going well and he tries to do it all himself, that can lead to their undoing as well. Question number 5, can Alabama's offense find some answers against the blitz? Their 3 losses this year were ironically to the 3 opponents that blitzed them the most. Vandy, Oklahoma, and Tennessee all blitzed them more than 25% of their dropbacks. And with Jalen liking to see where things are and wanting not to speed that process up too much, I'll be curious to see if Auburn decides to ramp up the pressure a little bit, because they're coming off of their lowest blitz total of the year against Texas A&M, where they blitzed on just 12% of Texas A&M's dropbacks. And then finally, question number 6, can Alabama's wide receivers step up? Last week was an awful performance by Alabama's wideouts. They weren't physical. They dropped about 5 passes. It was the most drops they've had this year. And they need to be much better against a really solid secondary that Auburn is going to run out. And drops have had a unique impact on this team this year. Ryan Williams has just 7 all year, which is pretty dang decent for a true freshman that's been targeted 80 times. But 5 of those 7 drops came in their 3 losses, including multiple drops against Oklahoma and against Vandy. So they're going to have to be better at wide receiver to help their quarterback out, because it's a really solid defense that they're going to be going against. I will not be making a pick in this game. I'll be watching it there from the booth in Bryant-Denny Stadium alongside Sean McDonough and Molly McGrath. We hope you'll join us at 3:30 Eastern Time on ABC. Notre Dame and USC, they traveled to Los Angeles, where Notre Dame is about a 7.5-point favorite right now, total in the low 50s. This game's Saturday, 3:30 Eastern Time on CBS. Notre Dame has won 9 straight games. They've outscored their opponents 293 points in that span. It's by far the biggest point differential by any team since week 3. USC, on the other hand, 6-5 on the season. They have had a lead in all 11 games this year. So it's crazy to just kind of see where SC's at and how many leads they've choked away as the game's gone along. Let's start there. Number 1, can USC get off to a fast start and finish? Now, Notre Dame's got tons of pressure. Win and in situation for Notre Dame. They win, they're in the playoff. They win, they got a home field. They lose, they're probably out. We'll find out. But it should be noted that USC in the Maryland game, they blew a 2-touchdown lead. Against Penn State, they were up 2 touchdowns in the second quarter. Against Minnesota, they were up 17-10 and driving in the fourth quarter when Miller Moss threw an interception that led to 14 unanswered to see them lose 24-17. And then against Michigan, they were up 24-20 with under 3 minutes left. Michigan was sitting there at their own 15-yard line in 2nd and 11, and Michigan couldn't complete a pass. Next thing you know, 2 plays later, 63 yards where Mullings runs through some contact, and now they're within striking distance of a win. So can USC actually hang on this time and not give it away in the fourth quarter like they have so many times this year? Question 2, will Notre Dame be able to control the line of scrimmage on both sides? Look, Notre Dame's identity is clear. They want to bully you by running the football with their 2 running backs and their outstanding quarterback. They average 222 yards a game on the ground. That's 11th in the sport. They've gone over 198 rushing yards in all but 3 of their games. One of those 3 was against NIU when they ran for just 123 yards. Notre Dame's defense, also, they're going to try to generate some pressure. You watch this defensive front, they are relentless, they are physical, and albeit they've had some turnovers and some guys that have been in and out of the lineup because of injury from time to time this year, it doesn't matter. It's like next man up mentality along the front. They apply pressure on 45% of the opponent's dropbacks. That's 6th in the college football. Question 3, will USC try to run the football? So far, their run-pass ratio, they're only running it about 38% of the time. That's designed runs. I'm not talking about, scrambles, something like that. I'm talking designed runs, just 38% of the time. Well, 38% run is 16th lowest in the FBS, which is why they only run for 144 yards a game, which is why their rushing attack is 84th in the country. Statistically, Notre Dame isn't great against the run, which is a little bit surprising. I think it's also a little bit misleading because they've played some of the best rushing teams in the country and still only allow 133 yards per game. When you're playing service academies that are super committed to running the football, that number can maybe be a little bit inflated, even though I do think against a traditional set, Notre Dame's been very stout against the run. Question 4, can USC attack this secondary? Notre Dame right now is the number 1 ranked pass defense in the country. They give up about 139 yards a game through the year. Now, let's also acknowledge, if we're going to give credit to Notre Dame for their rush defense, let's also take a little credit away from their pass defense, because when you're playing against Army, how often is your secondary going to be at risk of being torched? Probably not, right? So maybe they're not the best in the country, but they're probably pretty pretty dang good. And I do think when you look at SC's offense, Jaden Mayava, he's a playmaker, but he'll miss some throws now. I mean, this is a really diverse group of wide receivers. Zachariah Branch and Mekhi Lemon, really good catch and run guys. Kyron Hudson and Jacoby Lane, really solid, well-rounded wide receivers. And you have the massive mismatch that is Deuce Robinson, where he's got great length and is a huge problem in the red zone. Now, this is probably the best set of weapons that Notre Dame's seen all year. And without question, the best contingent of weapons that they've seen since Louisville. Louisville threw for 264 and scored 24 points. And Tyler Shuck got hit over and over and over and over again. He probably got hit 30 times in the game, but they did win some one-on-ones. Now, we know Notre Dame's going to play a lot of man. That's who they are. Nobody plays more man than them. Christian Gray, he's been incredible at corner on one side. Really, really impressed with how he stepped up this year. But on the other side, Leonard Moore has not been quite as good as the guy that he had replaced. Benjamin Morrison got injured earlier in the year, and prior to his injury, I think you make a case that he was the best cover corner in the FBS. So his absence against a deep wide receiver core could be a little bit challenging. So keep an eye on these corners for Notre Dame if they're having a hard time covering this excellent group of wide receivers. Question number 5, will USC turn the ball over? It's pretty simple for SC. They are 3-0 this year when they keep a clean sheet offensively. So when they don't turn it over, they win. And in the 4 losses that led to Miller Moss's benching, he had thrown 7 interceptions. That's why USC was 0-3 on the road. Now, Jordan Mayava comes in, makes his second start, turnover-free performance against UCLA. Now, you watch him against Nebraska, there were some dicey moments. Had a pick 6. There were also a few very dicey throws against the Bruins, threw an end zone fade to Jacoby Lane that was deflected and could have easily been intercepted. He also threw one right into a UCLA defender's hands. That was a problem. He also fumbled on a strip sack, but it was recovered. So I think that's something worth watching. And Mayava has started 13 games in his career at UNLV and USC. He's thrown 10 interceptions and has fumbled it 7 times. So he's got to keep a clean sheet because when they do, they have a real chance of winning the football game. I'll take Notre Dame to win and cover. USC is too one-dimensional. I think they play right into Notre Dame's strengths of being able to pound the football. I think Notre Dame is far more talented than Michigan, and Michigan took the fight to SC. I think Notre Dame will do the exact same thing. Texas at Texas A&M, the one we've all been waiting for. Texas right now, a narrow 6-point favorite on the road from Kyle Field. The total in the upper 40s. This game's Saturday, 7:30 Eastern time on ABC. The stakes could not be any bigger. Texas at Texas A&M, first time playing since 2011. They met every single year from 1915 to 2011. The Aggies moved to the SEC. Sayonara rivalry. We haven't seen you now in nearly a decade and a half. Well, we're back. This is also the first time they're teeing off as ranked opponents in the AP poll since 2004. So it's been a while. One thing of note, Quinn Ewers' ankle injury, a little limited last week, did not look 100% when teeing it up against Kentucky, especially there at the end of the game. Watching that ankle closely will be something worth monitoring. But as a kid from Texas, there's just no way Quinn Ewers is not going to play in this game. I would imagine he'll do whatever it takes to make sure he is on the field representing the Longhorns in this one. Question number 1. Can Texas continue to build on their resurgent run game? Now, Quintravion Wisner and Jaden Blue, they have finally got the run game going for the first time in, it seems like a while against a quality defense. Now, I look at Kentucky and I think wondering whether or not Kentucky's as good or as talented as they might look on the surface, but Kentucky's been battling some injuries. Like, they were playing hard and they were not at full strength against Texas, but they were closer to full strength than they were maybe against, say, Auburn. All right. Well, they ran for 250, Texas did. Wisner finished with a career-high 158 yards and a touchdown. Blue added nearly 100 himself on 15 carries, which is about 6.5 a carry, and a 5-yard touchdown. At one point, though, in the game, Texas is sitting there 24-14. Offense is going back on the field. Kind of need to put a drive together. What do? 86 yards, 15 consecutive run plays, took 8.5 minutes off the clock, 1-yard touchdown by Wisner to put the game on ice and give it back to Kentucky up 17 with 3 minutes left. I mean, that is what I want to see from the Longhorns moving forward. Now, Texas A&M, their defense is fresh off one of their worst performances of the year against the run against the Auburn Tigers. But overall, they haven't been terrible, but maybe they're not super elite. They're kind of a penetration group where they can get you behind the sticks by way of sacks and tackles for loss. But can they hold up against a traditional rushing attack is something I'll be watching closely. They give up just under 4 yards per carry. That's 53rd right now. One other problem for Texas when they run the football. Now, Jaden Blue, he had 2 fumbles last week, lost one of them. But so far this year, he has 7 fumbles. He's lost 3. As a team, the Texas Longhorns put the ball on the deck 6 times last week against Kentucky. So if they're going to run the football, stay committed to the run game, they better do a better job when it comes to ball security when they run the football. That's all I'm going to say. I mean, goodness gracious alive. Question number 2. Will Texas need the downfield throws? Now, we have talked a while about this when it comes to Texas. When it comes to, hey, blocking them up, being more aggressive, pushing the ball downfield, will that start to come out more and more as the level of competition increases? And my question here this week, will that be necessary? Because Texas right now is the 3rd ranked team in yards after catch. The only 2 teams better than them right now are Miami and North Texas. They have just under 2,000 yards after catch this season. And for Texas A&M, that's a massive area of concern. The Aggies are currently 114th in the FBS in yak allowed. They've given up 1,374 yards after catch this year. So A&M's weakness this season on the back end of the defensive unit has been tackling, getting guys to the ground, and crossing routes have been a huge problem. Well, guess what Texas does a lot of? And guess what Texas is great at? Yards after catch, crossing routes. Question number 3. Can Texas A&M, their pass rush, create major problems? Now, Texas's offensive line has been pretty dang solid all season long. Just 49 pressures given up. Now, they have at times struggled with penalties. Kelvin Banks, Cam Williams, it combined for almost 20 penalties between the 2 of them. And the one game that Texas lost this year, that was against Georgia. Texas quarterbacks, both Arch Manning and Quinn Ewers, got hit on 1 out of 3 dropbacks. That's about 10 percentage points higher than any other game this year. So this is a really disruptive defensive front for A&M. They did not have their best stuff last week, and frankly, down the stretch, they haven't been as good the last few weeks. But they are a group that is still capable of taking over the game if your O-line doesn't play well. So worth monitoring that group as well. Question 4, can Texas A&M stay on schedule by running the football? The 2 games this year where Texas A&M averaged less than 3.5 yards per carry were their 2 most disappointing defeats. One at the hands of Auburn, one at the hands of South Carolina. When they rush for more than 4 yards a carry, they're 6-0, including when they rushed for nearly 5 yards a carry against LSU, 5.5 yards a carry against Florida, and 6.5 yards a carry against Missouri. So they're going to have to be really good along the offensive line. Marcel Reed's going to have to churn out some hard yards. Their running backs, Amari Daniels, going to have to be better with his vision and finding space there between the tackles. And I think they're going to probably have to get a little creative and use some sideline-to-sideline run game as well involving Terry Bussey. Question number 5, can Texas A&M's tackles handle the speed and aggressiveness of Texas's defensive ends? Now, these 2 tackles for Texas A&M better be ready now. Trey Zune at left tackle, Demetrius Crownover at right tackle. These Texas defensive ends are super aggressive, which could be a little bit of a problem for the Aggies, especially on the right side. Now, Barron Sorrell, he leads Texas in pressures. He's been incredibly underrated for multiple years now, but is finally starting to get the recognition he deserves. Colin Simmons has 7 sacks this year. And then Anthony Hill, He's got amazing juice off the edge, but he can really blitz from anywhere. And there's a reason why 1 out of 3 of his pass rush attempts leads to pressures. And there's a reason why he leads the team in sacks. So keep an eye on those guys on the edges of the defense against the tackles of A&M, because that could be a huge problem for the Aggies. Question number 6, can Texas A&M's passing attack win some one-on-ones? Now, Marcel Reed dropped back 48 times against Auburn. I don't think that's a winning recipe against Texas. I thought he threw the ball really well for the most part. Threw it pretty well, and we've now seen that if he has to do it, he can deliver with his arm. He's proven that now with what he did last week. But now with their 3-headed monster of wide receiver, Jabari Barber, Jade Walker, Noah Thomas, he's coming off of one of the best games of his career. Every time they get near the red zone, they should throw one up in the end zone to Noah Thomas. He's 6'6". Let him go up and make a play. Maybe he can do it. Maybe draw a penalty against Texas. If nothing else, you're at least putting some fear in Texas that you'll take advantage of those one-on-ones when you have the chance. A&M has very solid weapons. I think they're actually slightly underrated. So I would expect those guys to find some space and maybe create some things with yards after catch on their own. Last week, Longhorns gave up 6 explosive pass plays against Kentucky. So that might be the path for A&M. Texas has not given up many explosive passes this year, but maybe this is the week where A&M has to get aggressive and they have to hit some downfield throws. These corners for Texas greatly improved. Jahdi Barron, Malik Muhammad have been really good on the outside. Mukuba's been a really nice addition as well. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see how that matchup is won in this game. Lastly, it's absolutely imperative that Texas A&M starts fast in this game. They are a resilient team, but when teams in the SEC are jumping out on A&M the way they've jumped out on them in the last 5 games, that's a huge problem. A&M has found themselves down by 10 points in their last 3 conference games. They've allowed the opponent to score first in 4 of the last 5 games. They're not a team that is built to come from behind, and because of the energy and the buildup of this game, it's really important for them to start fast so that crowd can remain energized for 60 minutes in the ball game. I pick in the game, and I've waffled here. I've gone back and forth, back and forth. I just think Texas is too complete. I thought for sure the Aggies would be in position to get this one, but I'm finding myself more and more concerned about their ability to defend Texas wide receivers in catch and run situations, and I'm also a little concerned about the Aggies being able to hold up along the offensive line. I'm taking the Longhorns. I would lay the points, but I'm hoping it's a classic there in College Station. But we just went 45 minutes on like 5 games, so we're going to pick up the pace just a little bit on some of these other games that might not be as competitive as some of the games that we just broke down a moment ago. Tennessee travels to Nashville to take on the Commodores. Tennessee is a 10.5-point favorite, total right around 48, 49 in that Pacific game. Saturday, noon Eastern time on ABC. Tennessee scored 40-plus points in 4 straight games against Vanderbilt. That's the longest streak against an SEC opponent in conference history. So will be interesting. They did, however, score 40 points in 5 straight games against Kentucky from 96 to 2000. So if they can get 5 here, they would match that performance against Kentucky. Question 1, can Vandy do anything to slow down Dylan Sampson? Now, Sampson added a rushing total last week against UTEP. Just perspective for a second. He's got 22 rushing touchdowns this year. He's got 35 career rushing touchdowns, which is ridiculous. He's the first SEC player with a rushing touchdown in each of his team's first 11 games of the season since Derrick Henry back in 2015. So just goes to show you how good Dylan Sampson's been. I don't think he gets the credit he deserves. He deserves more. I think he should be in the Heisman mix. Personally, I don't think he's going to get there. I don't think he's going to get the love he deserves, but he's excellent. And I don't think Vandy wants any part of what Dylan Sampson's going to bring to him. But if Vandy can play well against the run, that would go a long way in making things interesting for the Volunteers. Question number 2, can Tennessee's pass rush fluster Diego Pavia? Diego's probably coming off of his worst game of the year against LSU. He just didn't play very well. But a big reason why is that it felt like he was under constant duress. Now, quietly, the offensive line for Vanderbilt has really regressed down the stretch. LSU's front was in Pavia's face all night long. Well, now let's raise you one, because James Pierce, Omar Norman Lott, Joshua Josephs, this is a group that is tenacious and that will make life very difficult for Diego Pavia. They're going to have to be disciplined because Diego can take off and make a lot of plays with his legs, but there's so many guys that you have to account for when you're trying to protect your quarterback when playing against Tennessee, and I'm not convinced that Vanderbilt can do that right now. I'll take Tennessee. Vandy just isn't playing well enough up front to make this one interesting. South Carolina is at Clemson. Clemson right now, about a 2.5-point favorite. Total around 49. This game's Saturday, noon Eastern time on ESPN. South Carolina and Clemson are facing off in an AP-ranked matchup for the first time since 2013. The Gamecocks, by the way, 5-1 all-time in AP-ranked matchups against the Tigers. South Carolina's won 5 straight, a win against Clemson, but matched their longest single-season win streak in the last 40 years. Question 1, will Clemson be getting back to 100% from a health standpoint? They've been really beat up. Now, they've had some injury issues down the stretch. Now, Wade Woodaz, DeMonte Capehart, RJ Mickens, Jake Brenningstool, even the guys that haven't missed time look like they've been a little beat up, like Phil Maffa. He's been a little beat up down the stretch. But the biggest question mark this week is probably along the offensive line. Tristan Lee and Marcus Tate, if they can't go along the offensive line, Clemson might be in significant trouble. Question 2, will Clemson be able to hold up along the offensive line? Now, a lot of it has to do with what I just discussed. If Tristan Lee and Marcus Tate can go, maybe so. If not, it'll be tough. But we'll be watching that very closely. Cade Klubnik's pressure numbers are like everyone else. They're not great. When he's not pressured, he's really good. When he is pressured, he's not very good. So is everybody. So I wouldn't take that too personal. It's just the realities of the situation. But one key for him might be his legs. If this D-line gets too aggressive, and they will get aggressive, this South Carolina front will tee off, pin their ears back, they rush wide, they rush upfield. If they get too aggressive, his legs could take off. We saw multiple times this year where South Carolina's defensive end, maybe a little bit too much, and then boom, the quarterback can take off, slow down that pass rush, calm them down just a little bit. But South Carolina generates pressure on 45% of the opposing quarterback's dropbacks. That's the third highest percentage in the country. So remember the names: Dylan Stewart, Kyle Kennard, and Tonka Hemingway. Those guys are awesome. Stewart and Kennard on the outside, Hemingway on the inside. There's a bunch of other guys in there as well for South Carolina that can make life very difficult for Clemson. Question number 3. Will Clemson's defense be able to slow down South Carolina's rushing attack? Now, Lenoris Sellers and Rocket Sanders, now that he's healthy, is looking a little faster, looking a little more effective. But Lenoris Sellers, his legs are always going to be a significant problem. He's 240 pounds. He's quicker than you realize, but he can also run with power. Here's the other problem, is that Clemson's defense has not been very good this year against the run, relatively speaking. They're giving up 4.4 yards a carry. That's 81st. Louisville gashed them, and most recently, the Citadel gashed them. They got gashed for 200-plus rushing yards in the first half. They gave up 288 altogether. One of the big problems for Clemson is they just don't have the depth that they once had. When they take their starters out and put in their backups, there's a pretty considerable drop-off. For instance, if you watch their game against Pitt, when TJ Parker wasn't on the field, Pitt actually had a chance to block the defensive front, but when he was out there, there was no shot whatsoever. Hopefully Clemson can get DeMonte Capehart back this week because that would help a lot. But man, the run defense, they better be at their best against a very physical and imposing offensive line and rushing attack for South Carolina. I'm taking South Carolina. I don't think Clemson's seen anything like they're going to see on Saturday from this defensive front, especially with the concerns on the offensive line. I don't think it's a very good matchup for the Clemson Tigers. Miami will travel to Syracuse. Miami's a 10.5-point favorite. The total 67. This game's Saturday, 3:30 Eastern time on ESPN. This is a significant game for Miami. Obviously, they win. They're in the ACC championship. They lose, they're probably out. Two of the best quarterbacks from a statistical standpoint in the ACC with Kyle McCord and Cam Ward. McCord and Ward both could go over 4,000 passing yards in this game. Question 1, will Cam Ward continue to be super efficient? Now, it felt like early in the season, when I say early, like the first 10 games, Cam Ward was all about big plays, all about wanting to allow guys to uncover, buying time in the backfield. Well, there's a reason why he holds the ball for nearly 3 seconds. It's the 100th longest in the country. But last week was a very different approach. Last week, he attempted just 3 passes that traveled 20 plus yards downfield. On 38 attempts, that's pretty considerable. His air yards per target was also the lowest of the season. He was more methodical, and it paid a lot of dividends because that's what the team needed against Wake Forest. Question 2, will Miami continue to tackle better defensively? Now, I know some people will cite other sites and have specific missed tackle numbers. I don't have those. All I know is that when I watched Miami this year, there have been countless games in which I feel like their guys are in position and they can't bring guys to the ground. Now, I don't necessarily have the stats to back this opinion up, but I watched the game last week and it felt like there were a lot fewer missed tackles. They were more under control, and it was really refreshing to watch. I think they also simplified things a little bit defensively, and it led to a better performance in the second half of that football game. And question 3, which Kyle McCord are we going to get? Because if you look at his performance this year, he's put up some gaudy numbers. I mean, he's coming off a performance where he threw for nearly 500 yards. But if you watch the game, there were about 4 dropped interceptions. Now, he's not afraid to throw it into traffic. He's not afraid to take some risks. And against an athletic defense, he's going to need to be really smart. Because this roller coaster that we've seen from him from time to time is not sustainable, not when you're playing against a really quality opponent in Miami. I'm taking the Hurricanes. I think this game has track meet potential. Would not surprise me if it's super high scoring. But if I got to have it and it becomes a track meet, give me Cam Ward over Kyle McCord every day and twice on Saturday. Kansas State at Iowa State. Iowa State, a narrow 3-point favorite. This game, 7:30 Eastern time on Fox. Kansas State trying to play the spoiler because if Iowa State wins, it's a high likelihood they'll be playing in the Big 12 championship game the following week. Question number 1. Can Iowa State's O-line continue to play at a pretty high level? They played great in the front 7 last week. And you look at that Utah group up front, man, that was very tough. That's a very tough defense to manage against. And Iowa State had 400 plus total yards of offense against a really solid group at all 3 levels. Now, Kansas State, they're really good in affecting the quarterback. They have 30 sacks this year. They have a couple stars along the defensive front. Brendan Mott, 6'5", 250, leads the Big 12 in sacks. Had an interception actually last week in their win over Cincinnati. So that will be an area this game will be determined. Iowa State's offensive line against Kansas State's defensive line. Question 2, can Rocco Beck get back on track? I don't think he had his best stuff last week against Utah. Threw a bad pick 6, a couple others that probably could have been intercepted, but it's been a little bit of a roller coaster for Rocco Beck here in the second half of the season. There have been some great performances, but there's also been a couple subpar performances. The good news is it's seldom when there's been back-to-back weeks where he doesn't play at a pretty high level. And with the game on the line, he's really calm. Never seems like the moment's too big for him. He's exactly who I'd want under center if I were a fan of the Cyclones. And question number 3, can Kansas State establish the run game? DJ Giddens is the centerpiece. We know him, 6.5 yards a carry. He's big time. Avery Johnson, however, with the quarterback spot, he's going to be really effective as well. He's got 6 touchdowns on the ground, nearly 500 yards of rushing as well. This is a really good 1-2 punch, and they're going to be creative with how they deploy their weapons against Iowa State, but I'm taking Iowa State. I think they handled their business. They're at home and punch their ticket to the Big 12 title game. And then last, but certainly not least, the number 1 ranked team in the country, the Oregon Ducks, welcome the Washington Huskies to town. Oregon, it's about a 3-touchdown favorite. This game's Saturday, 7:30 Eastern time. Oregon is the last remaining undefeated team in the FBS. They are currently sitting there 11-0, so very exciting. The interesting thing about this game is the last 3 games against the Ducks, all 3 have come by exactly 3 points. This is the Huskies we're talking about. So that includes a win over Oregon in the 2023 Pac-12 title game. So over the last couple of years, Oregon is 0-2 against Washington and 23-0 against everybody else. Dan Lanning trying to get his first win against the Washington Huskies. So you know he's anxious and has had this one circled after some excruciating losses the last couple years. A couple things that I'm watching in this game. We're not going to go through the questions or anything like that. 1, Oregon's pass rush. Washington's really quick passing attack. I think Washington's got very underrated wide receivers. So I think Will Rogers and company, they're going to try to just paper cut Oregon's defense to death. 5 yards here, 6 yards here. Get the ball out quickly. Can Oregon's pass rush create a little bit of an edge on that side? Oregon's passing attack, I want to continue to see Dylan Gabriel being efficient with sound decision-making. It's a rivalry game. Emotions are heightened. He's going to want to take chances. He's going to want to push the ball downfield. But I think Oregon has a considerable gap in personnel. He just needs to be smart with the football. If he's smart with the football, they should be in really good shape. And then finally, how much will Oregon lean on running the football here? Washington's very solid on defense. They're a solid outfit defensively at all three levels. I just want to see a little bit more balance from Oregon. I'm not saying it's necessarily going to make a huge difference in this one, but I do think when they get into the postseason, Big Ten championship, college football playoff, creating a little bit more balance offensively is going to be really helpful for the Ducks. I'll take Oregon in this game. I think I will take the points from the Washington Huskies. It just feels like a lot. 3 touchdowns. I think Washington's better than that 6-5 record would indicate. So I take the points, but I think Oregon gets the job done. A couple giant killers before we get you out of here. I'm taking South Carolina over Clemson. I'm taking Wake Forest over Duke. I'm taking Cincinnati over TCU. We really appreciate you guys being with us. It's been an awesome show today. Continue to lock in with us on Sundays. We'll break down this game, and then we'll also, like we always do, we'll break down this game, these games, and then we'll also start to look ahead to some conference championship games the following week. So we very much appreciate those of you that have been with us all season long. Tremendous regular season. Let's finish on a high note. Like, rate, and subscribe to the show wherever you get your show. And those of you that are here with us via the ESPN College Football YouTube channel, you can subscribe to that as well. So for all of us here at ACF, for Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, I'm Greg. We hope you have an awesome day. And remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.